Hour Zero. The war begins with an alarm at the 2nd Space Warning Squadron in the heart of Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado. Tens of thousands of miles above the Earth, the United States' space-based infrared system keeps a careful eye on the Earth, with a string of satellites in geostationary orbit around the planet. From this ultimate high ground, their unblinking electronic eyes monitor the planet's surface for infrared events. The satellites are supplemented by a constellation of surveillance platforms in lower orbits and networked together to track, identify, and report on any significant infrared event anywhere in the world. Originally, the network was operated by the Air Force and designed to detect nuclear tests conducted by the Soviet Union and other foreign nations. Then it was upgraded to provide early warning for ICBM launches. The massive heat plumes from the big intercontinental missiles are easily spotted, even from tens of thousands of miles above the Earth and through thick cloud cover. Now the system is so sensitive that it's able to track anti-ship missiles launched by the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and on January 7, 2020, proved its worth when it gave early warning to U.S. forces in Iraq as they were targeted by dozens of missiles fired from Iran in retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Not a single U.S. service member was killed in the massive attack thanks to the advanced warning. War between China and the United States starts on a similar note, only on a much more massive scale. Tensions with China have been building for years as the nation becomes increasingly more assertive and determined to upend the US-led liberal world order. China seeks to recreate the world in its own image and works to spread authoritarianism and suppress democracy around the world. Much like the Soviet Union in its early days, China believes that the survival of its ruling Chinese Communist Party relies on the spreading of its ideology around the world and beating back the influence of liberal democracies from its own borders. But China cannot be a major global power until it breaks U.S. influence in the Pacific, putting America and China on an inevitable collision course. At the moment, China is fully contained by the First Island Chain, a chain of islands stretching from Japan to Taiwan and the Philippines. The First Island Chain has contained communist nations since the Cold War. Any Chinese fleet sailing past this chain is under threat of attack from all sides, and China cannot secure its own vital trade shipping without breaking containment. The easiest way to break the chain is to invade Taiwan, which is already a priority goal for the CCP. This has made war between China and the US seem all but inevitable. But before it can launch a successful cross-strait invasion, China must beat back the mighty U.S. Navy from the South Pacific. For this task, it's created the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, an entire branch of the military dedicated to long-range missile warfare. With an arsenal of thousands of ballistic and anti-ship missiles, the PLARF is the greatest threat the U.S. Navy has faced in its entire history, and on the eve of war, it's the first to strike. All across the heartland of China, hundreds of missiles lift to the sky. Some are launched from silos. These are larger, long-range ballistic missiles which will target U.S. bases as far away as Guam. Hawaii is within range as well, but the decision to strike Hawaii or not is a political one fraught with great risks. Not only would it be a direct attack on a U.S. state, but it threatens to galvanize the American people, as many would consider it a second Pearl Harbor. China's hope is that it can knock the U.S. out of the war in a massive preemptive strike, inflicting enough damage to the U.S. military hardware to render its Pacific Forces combat ineffective and killing enough U.S. service members to discourage an American public China believes doesn't have the stomach for a painful extended war in the Pacific. Ultimately, it's decided that Hawaii is to be included in the attack. China has built up its own forces for a cross-strait invasion for months, sending a very clear signal to the world of its intentions. This has given the U.S. plenty of time to disperse its forces, pulling back many of its ships and aircraft to Hawaii and out of range of all but the longest-range Chinese missiles. To not attack Hawaii would leave a significant amount of U.S. firepower intact and even harder to target as it disperses once more upon entering the theater. Likewise, the decision to attack U.S. bases in South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines is a difficult one for China. Attacking these bases means inevitably causing collateral damage to the host countries and risks dragging them into the war. However, not attacking these bases leaves most of America's Pacific combat power intact and able to retaliate with ease from Pacific airfields and ports. Ultimately, the choice is a pragmatic one. China is already bearing the weight of hefty pre-war sanctions meant to deter it from its course. It must win this war and win it fast, and that means neutralizing all U.S. combat power, no matter where it is based. U.S. space surveillance satellites immediately spot the infrared signature of hundreds of ballistic missiles lifting to the sky. In less than 2 seconds after detection, the alarm is already blaring at U.S. Space Force's 2nd Space Warning Squadron. After a very quick verification that this is not an error, a priority flash alert is dispatched to the President of the United States, combatant commanders, and U.S. installations and ships around the world. China has timed a cyber operation against the U.S. military network simultaneously with its massive attack, but it's unable to defeat the multi-redundancy global alerting system used by the American military without physically blowing satellites out of orbit. The greatest concern is that some of these missiles could be nuclear in nature, and there is simply no way to tell until impact. The Department of Defense does not believe that China would launch a nuclear attack without significant provocation or unless the CCP found itself in a life-or-death scenario. But U.S. nuclear forces are put on their highest alert anyway. Space Force supercomputers, however, have calculated the trajectory of the Chinese threats, and none appear to be en route to the U.S. homeland, as would be the case in a nuclear attack. The White House bets on a conventional attack. At installations and ships across the Pacific, U.S. missile defenses get to work. Spy radars track the ballistic threats as Aegis computers work on a firing solution. Fleet air defenses spit out volleys of SM-3 missiles to intercept the incoming anti-ship ballistic missiles as they enter their terminal trajectories. On land, Patriot air defense batteries fire their own interceptors. Japanese self-defense forces add their own interceptors to the volleys racing up to the sky to meet the incoming threats. One by one, Chinese missiles are blown out of the sky, but China's anti-ship missile inventory is massive, and it has more than enough missiles to saturate the defenses of every U.S. vessel in its Pacific fleet. Hitting a moving target thousands of miles away, however, is not easy, so to improve their odds, U.S. ships begin erratic maneuvers. Its nuclear-powered aircraft carriers are leaving the rest of the fleet in the dust. Despite being the largest combat vessels in the world, the U.S. Navy's nuclear carrier fleet is capable of putting on bursts of speed at classified velocities. Movement complicates Chinese firing solutions, and some of the anti-ship missiles are off course as they re-enter the atmosphere and weather the volley of SM-3s. U.S. electronic attack against Chinese satellites is also complicating guidance, and some of the missiles who survive the hail of missile defenses smash into the ocean harmlessly. Many don't, however, using both satellite navigation and active radar guidance. Chinese DF-21s, dubbed carrier killers, pack a 600-kilogram conventional warhead. Over 1,300 pounds of high explosives smash into the deck of the USS Carl Vinson and Theodore Roosevelt, penetrating into the lower flight deck before detonating. The explosion is catastrophic, destroying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of aircraft and equipment. Even a near miss is enough to seriously damage the aft of a U.S. supercarrier, and in a flash, America's naval air power is almost completely knocked out of the war. At port facilities and airfields across the Pacific, Chinese missiles rain down and saturate air defenses, destroying aircraft on runways and inside soft shelters. Fuel and maintenance facilities are a priority target, but it's difficult to do much damage to fuel systems buried deep underground. Runways are cratered across the Pacific, but most of the damage can be repaired within hours by skilled crews. The worst of the damage will only knock an airfield out for a day or two at most. The damage to parked U.S. Air Force, Marines, and Navy aircraft, though, is significant. Having pulled back a significant amount of aircraft to Australia and Hawaii has limited the damage, but hundreds of U.S. and Allied aircraft are nonetheless damaged or destroyed. The missile attacks even extend all the way to joint U.S.-Australian air bases along the north coast of the continent. Inevitably, there is collateral damage. Multiple missiles stray off course and smash into civilian targets. Hundreds of Japanese, South Korean, and Filipino civilians are killed, along with scores of service members. China has in effect declared war on the entire U.S. Pacific alliance system, but the nation has no choice. If it's to win the Pacific, it has to deny the U.S. the ability to operate close to Taiwan battlespace, and that means dragging its allies and partners into the conflict. Day 2. The Chinese invasion of Taiwan is underway. A fleet of 1,000 ships, most of them smaller civilian vessels, has been assembled over the last 3 months and has been crossing the 100 miles between mainland China and Taiwan. The same missile assault that devastated U.S. forces in the Pacific laid waste to Taiwanese infrastructure as well. Military targets and airfields across the country came under attack from thousands of shorter-range missiles. It's the biggest missile attack in human history. But while Taiwan has suffered significant losses, it's been prepared for such an attack. The majority of its air force is safely secured inside hardened aircraft shelters and mountain tunnels. The airfields are devastated, but they can and will be quickly repaired. Already, Taiwanese F-16s are engaging in long-range, beyond-visual-range battles with their Chinese counterparts. The advantage in the air is decisively China's. Not only does it vastly outnumber Taiwan, but it's operating from airfields across the Chinese mainland that are out of reach from Taiwanese missile attack. Taiwan's sortie rates, meanwhile, are abysmal until the damaged airfields are repaired and aircraft are moved to stretches of highway to serve as impromptu runways. China, however, runs into the same problem that Russia did in its air war against Ukraine. Its lack of combat experience makes it difficult for it to deconflict the airspace over and around Taiwan. Friendly fire incidents from destroyers across the Taiwan Strait downing Chinese jets are disturbingly common. During Desert Storm, the US-led coalition was able to deconflict the airspace over Iraq despite 4,000 operational combat air platforms at the time, resulting in only a small handful of blue-on-blue incidents. But the US military trains aggressively and in conjunction with its various military branches. China has only recently unified its military under a single joint command and has only been running realistic training scenarios for a few years. The Chinese military is green, and it's paying the price for it. The amount of air power China can bring to bear over Taiwan is significant, but limited by its ability to keep its air defense network from blowing friendlies out of the sky or being vulnerable to enemy attack. This creates opportunities for Taiwan's beleaguered defenders. The cross-strait invasion fleet runs into a veritable wall of anti-ship missiles. Taiwan has been armed with hundreds of American-made Harpoon anti-ship missiles, which can be fired from F-16s or from ground-based launchers. The Harpoon is an old missile by modern standards and quickly being replaced in the US military with a newer generation of anti-ship weapons, but it's still capable, especially so in large numbers. Its 488-pound warhead may not pack the punch of more modern 1,000-pound warheads, but it's more than enough to seriously damage or even cripple a medium-sized ship. The sky is full of Chinese anti-missile defenses, with missile interceptors flying out to smack Harpoons out of the sky and CIWS systems filling the air with tungsten. Inevitably, though, a significant number of these missiles punch through China's air defenses and wreak havoc on the invading fleet. Adding to the number of Harpoons is volleys of Xiangfang 2 and 3 missiles launched from mobile platforms. This helps them evade the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force's precision preparatory bombardment. The carnage is vast, but so too is China's numbers. Inevitably, its troops make landfall on one of the just over a dozen beaches suitable for the invasion. However, Taiwan has booby-trapped the beaches with all manner of defenses. Upon approaching, landing craft suddenly find the ocean around them on fire as pipes release oil into the ocean and set it on fire. Hundreds of Chinese Marines are incinerated in the landing craft. But once they hit the beach, they find boards with razor-sharp pieces of metal attached to them just under the sand. As the Chinese Marines hit the deck to crawl forward under a hail of enemy fire, their flesh is ripped apart. Then there's the landmines, thousands of them. Chinese aircraft and ships have attempted to blast safe paths through the vast minefields, stretching nearly 100 meters from the shore to the Taiwanese positions, but US-supplied artillery shells can redeposit fresh minefields from a distance. Each shell carries up to 9 anti-vehicle mines, or many more smaller mines, and can create vast minefields with just a few volleys. That is, when the Chinese Marines aren't being shelled with anti-personnel high-explosive shells. The beaches have been sighted in. Defending artillery just needs to fire as quickly as it can reload. Chinese attack helicopters attempt to knock the artillery set up deep behind the beaches, but are greeted by swarms of man-portable air defense missiles. Incoming Chinese ships also have to navigate a massive minefield deployed by Taiwan in the weeks leading up to the invasion. The strait has not been safe for civilian traffic since the minefields were deployed, and China has attempted to use minesweepers to clear the strait. But these ships are easy prey for anti-ship Harpoons. Safe lanes through the floating mines are carved out with a combination of brute force and what minesweepers survive in their efforts. Chinese casualties are apocalyptic. It takes the concentrated might of the PLARF and the Chinese Air Force to blast the Taiwanese defenses apart so the amphibious assault can push out of the beaches. Even then, half of the assaults fail. Where they succeed, fresh Chinese troops must disembark only to wade their way through scores of their fallen comrades. D-Day pales in comparison. This isn't war, this is a slaughter. Day 3. China's problems have been compounded significantly with the arrival of US air power. American carriers have been at arm's length with the use of ballistic missiles and H-6 bombers armed with standoff anti-ship missiles. However, a flight of H-6 attempting to perform a follow-up attack against Taiwan were pounced on by US F-35s flying out of the Philippines, resulting in the loss of 16 bombers. The US Air Force has recovered faster than expected from the PLARF's missile barrage, mostly by widely dispersing prior to the war and then by quickly converting civilian airfields in host nations to military ones. China's plans to use H-6s to keep the US Navy at bay is canceled for the time being. The PLARF still has hundreds of missiles left, but they are a quickly diminishing resource and one that cannot be easily replenished. Neither can American air power, but the US has nearly twice as many combat aircraft as China, and they are overwhelmingly more modern than their Chinese counterparts. It'll take weeks to rotate the bulk of its firepower to the Pacific and repair destroyed logistics chains, but the US and Japan are able to start air operations against China by the 3rd day of the war, if on a limited scale. Rather than try to fight for the sky over Taiwan, US aircraft launch standoff weapons at Chinese vessels in the strait and those attempting to isolate the island by blockading it from the north and south. A new weapon enters the war, one that's being fielded for the first time: the U.S.'s Long-Range Anti-Ship Missile, or LRASM. This intelligent, stealthy missile can fly unguided to a target zone and then use artificial intelligence to choose its own target, ignoring civilian vessels and remaining undetected for far longer than its non-stealthy counterparts. It's not invisible to the radar, but it does allow the LRASM to get much closer before Chinese defenses attempt to intercept it, greatly increasing its survivability. Featuring a 1,000-pound blast fragmentation warhead, LRASMs aren't just twice as survivable as harpoons, they pack twice the punch against Chinese ships, and China is facing a significant amount of them. The U.S. has deployed the LRASM not just on F-15s, F-18s, and F-35s, but on a completely new and revolutionary platform codenamed Rapid Dragon. The concept is stunningly simple, but proved tricky to get right. Taking advantage of America's huge air mobility fleet, Rapid Dragon consists of stacks of missiles and air-droppable modules that are simply shoved out the back of transport aircraft. With up to 45 missiles per drop, Rapid Dragon utilizes C-130 and C-17 cargo planes, normally slow, vulnerable, and unarmed transports, to deliver cruise missiles against both land and naval targets at ranges of up to 570 miles. C-130 aircraft only need 3,000 feet of runway space to take off from, which has made it impossible for China to shut down every airfield in the Pacific that the aircraft could fly from. With 2 Rapid Dragon pallets each, for a total of 12 JASSM missiles, the U.S. is able to completely overwhelm China's air defenses from well outside the range of even its air force. C-17s flying from airfields as far away as the U.S. homeland link up with aerial tankers to refuel and approach the Taiwan battlespace. Each C-17 can carry 5 pallets of 9 JASSM missiles, and some of the pallets contain drone decoys instead of missiles. Other missile variants include sea mines, which scatter a wide area with deadly sea mines that wreak havoc on Chinese shipping. American submarines, meanwhile, have been making a meal of Chinese ships and attack submarines alike. China's submarine fleet is notoriously noisy, and only its newest subs are comparably silent. But these are still in low numbers. American attack subs first focus on eliminating the undersea threat, but many quickly transition to attacking Chinese surface vessels. With an average depth of 50 meters, the Taiwan Strait is too shallow for a submarine to safely operate in without being detected. But U.S. submarines have been equipped with long-range anti-ship missiles, which can be fired from their torpedo tubes. This allows them to engage surface vessels from well outside the strait, and the deep waters immediately off the eastern Taiwanese coast means they can get close enough to launch cruise missile strikes against Chinese forces landing on the island. America's silent service, a threat overlooked by even U.S. analysts, is quickly proving to be its deadliest weapon against China. While the U.S. Navy's surface fleet still can't approach Taiwan due to the anti-ship threat, China's anti-submarine warfare capabilities are notoriously poor, and U.S. submarines are notoriously good at their job. Week 2. The air war over Taiwan has been joined in earnest at last, with U.S. and allied forces having weathered the Chinese missile storm. America's air fleets outnumber China's by 2-1, but a significant amount of its Pacific air power was destroyed on the ground or knocked out of commission in the opening hours of the surprise missile attack. Requests by the Air Force for hardened shelters in vulnerable airfields such as Guam have gone largely ignored by U.S. Congress for over a decade, and its aircraft have paid the toll. But the U.S. is able to bring in aircraft from other theaters, and Japan and Australia have both thrown in their air forces to the fight. South Korea has decided to engage targets of opportunity as they arise and provide security for U.S. tankers flying in its airspace, but its air force needs to be prepared for a possible attack by North Korea. There is a significant fear of North Korea exploiting the chaos to launch an attack to the south, effectively tying up large amounts of South Korean resources. Allied aircraft are on the whole better equipped and its pilots better trained than their People Liberation Army Air Force counterparts, but China has one significant advantage over the Allies, the PL-15. Outranging American AIM-120s by as much as 10 miles. The PL-15 air-to-air missile is a deadly threat to Allied aircraft and gives Chinese fighters the ability to engage American, Australian, and Japanese aircraft well before they are able to. But the PL-15 can't hold F-35s and F-22s under the same threat. It's unknown at what ranges Chinese aircraft can detect and target U.S. stealth aircraft, but it's estimated to be at only 24 or so miles, allowing F-22s and F-35s to fire well before the Chinese fighters even realize they're there. However, China has its own stealth fighter, the J-20, or more accurately, a low observable fighter, as the J-20's stealth capabilities are significantly worse than that of its American counterparts. But this still allows J-20s to seriously threaten fourth-generation aircraft, such as the F-15, 16, and F-18s. and when equipped with the PL-15 makes them a deadly threat to anything but stealth aircraft. China has an estimated 200 of these aircraft, and it knows that it must use them wisely, so it sets them to the task of locating and destroying Allied AWACS platforms. This puts even F-22s and F-35s at risk, as the downing of an AWACS means friendly fighters must use their own radars to locate and prosecute targets. American stealth aircraft have some capability to passively detect enemy aircraft, especially those blasting out their own radar, and the AESA arrays can function as both a radar and a jammer to degrade enemy targeting radars. But the moment they light up their radars, their stealth is significantly compromised. The air war favors the Allies in the long run, but China in the short run, with its ability to fly directly from home bases and the mighty PL-15 in its inventory. The US has a counter to China's missile, the AIM-260, which has an estimated 33% greater range than the PL-15, but the weapon is still not out of testing and into operational use. Month 2. Both sides have suffered catastrophic losses to their air fleets, but now the war shifts significantly to the Allies' favor. As J-16s and J-20s run in short supply, China's relying on older and older jets. To make matters worse, inland air bases have come under attack by submarine-launched cruise missiles and standoff weapons from American B-51 and B-1 bombers. Stealthy B-2 bombers slip inland to launch attacks against logistics networks and military bases on the mainland, a provocative move that many feared would be an escalation of the war. However, the US cannot win unless it strikes directly at Chinese bases and slows the rate of operations. China's invasion is ground to a standstill as fighting rages for control over major Taiwanese cities. China carefully observed Russia's invasion of Ukraine and saw how Volodymyr Zelensky had been a rallying figure for both Ukraine's armed forces and the international community. Thus, at the start of the war, it activated assassination teams already on the island in an attempt to kill the Taiwanese president and senior government and military leadership. Under protection from their own special forces and with the invasion pending, the attacks were largely foiled, but several key generals and politicians were dispatched by China's kill teams. The U.S. Pacific Surface Fleet is now in the action and in the business of sinking Chinese ships. China has more ships than the U.S., approximately 246 more, but U.S. ships pack a bigger punch. This is benefits and drawbacks. U.S. ships can stay in the fight longer before needing resupply, but the loss of each U.S. vessel has a bigger impact on the overall force than a Chinese loss. However, the U.S. Navy has put its foot directly on China's jugular, and China had no hope of shaking it off. In the Straits of Malacca and the Gulf of Oman, U.S. Navy ships patrol for Chinese merchant vessels. With over 60% of its trade coming in via the ocean and the majority of its oil, China is critically dependent on sea trade for its economic prosperity. Yet China's Navy doesn't have the ability to challenge the U.S. Navy far from its own shores and has no hope of dislodging the U.S. blockade, especially now that NATO ships have joined the effort. The attack on U.S. bases across the Pacific automatically triggered an Article 5 declaration, and while European power is largely concerned with containing further Russian aggression, America's European allies have been providing a steady stream of anti-ship missiles and air-to-air weapons. Now a number of their aircraft and both surface vessels and submarines have joined the fight in the Pacific. China's trade artery has been severed, and it faces a global alliance. Its only hope is to win the war in Taiwan quickly and force the government to capitulate. However, the Taiwanese people stubbornly refuse to surrender, and millions of people have volunteered to fight the invaders. Only a portion of them can be armed, but this means China must bring over 2 million troops across the strait if it hopes to pacify the island and its population. This is becoming increasingly impossible as the Allies achieve air and naval superiority over China, and Chinese oil supplies dwindle with U.S. submarine-launched cruise missile strikes against pipelines bringing in oil from Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. The Chinese people are forced to ration oil and other supplies, growing increasingly unhappy with the toll of the war. They were promised a swift victory over Taiwan and its American allies, but Taiwan is refusing to capitulate. The war will rage for months more to come, with horrible losses on both sides. It will take America a decade to rebuild its air and naval forces, forcing it to lean heavily on its allies in the meantime to maintain global stability. But in the end, this is the U.S.'s greatest strength, its global network of partners and allies. China, meanwhile, will be economically devastated by a failed invasion, with the U.S. refusing to end the war until the entirety of the People's Liberation Army, Air Force, and Navy both are destroyed, so that China may not threaten the Pacific again. Now, go check out Germany's World War III plan, or click this other video instead.